making this, there you go. We're going to make this recording available to the participants. I'll be sending out the link tomorrow, along with some additional resources and links and contact information for our presenters today, so that if you have any additional questions, you can follow up directly with them. So having said that, I'd like to welcome our special guest. We have two guests here today. Bess Morrison from she's the Source Protection Coordinator for the local Source Water Protection Grant Program at New Hampshire DES. And we also have Pierce Rigrod from New Hampshire DES, and he'll be following up the program with some project examples from previous years. But I'd like to get started with Bess. She's worked in an environmental laboratory sector, performing chemical analysis of waters and soils for more than 15 years. She holds a BS in biology and a minor in Russian language from the University of Alaska, Fairbanks. She's also worked for the USDA Forest Service in the Willamette National Forest in Oregon. And protecting the environment and water resources has always been a passion for Bess, and she will continue to do this work at New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services. So we're really happy to have her here today, and I want to welcome her and thank her for bringing us this information. So go ahead, Bess, and take it away.
Thank you, Barbara. Just before I get started, I just want to let you folks know I'm going to stop my video because sometimes technical issues can happen when you have multiple videos happening. So let me just, okay. So good afternoon and welcome. Thank you for joining us for the New Hampshire Association of Conservation Commission's Lunch and Learn. Yes, I'm Bess Morrison, and I'm the program manager for the local Source Water Protection Grant Program here at New Hampshire DES. I'd like to speak to you today about our program and also provide some helpful guidance on filling out the application if you plan to do so. And as Barbara had mentioned, also joining us today is Pierce Rigrod, who's the Source Protection Program Supervisor for DES. He will be talking about some past grant projects and how their success resulted in the protection of drinking water resources in New Hampshire. Following our presentation today, there'll be a question and answer session. So as the presentation is progressing, please write down any questions you might have along the way so that you can ask them at the end. About half of the people, 54%, living in New Hampshire get their household drinking water from public water systems and are regulated under the state and federal Safe Drinking Water Acts. Sources for public water systems include lakes, rivers, and wells. The mission of the New Hampshire DES Drinking Water and Groundwater Bureau is to protect public health by ensuring safe and reliable drinking water through collaboration, education, assistance, and oversight. Through our grant program, assistance is provided to the New Hampshire communities who need financial help to achieve successful source water protection projects. Some of the reasons for applying for grant funding are to help plan and prepare for difficult circumstances with regards to drinking water sources, to help get your project rolling, to help mitigate impacts to source waters, and inevitably, to help save money in the long term. All of these and more result in protecting our valuable drinking water sources. There are some new items to the application for this next round. Fumbling through an application can be frustrating if there's more than a couple pages. So we've recently added a table of contents to make the searching for a particular section a lot easier. If you're viewing the application online, you can click on the desired section in the table of contents and it will take you directly to that section. Another exciting new item is the increased funding. So now we have $25,000 for most grant projects and now $30,000 for projects that address climate change challenges.
Bess, can I just check in with you for a second? I noticed
Absolutely.
My slides are not forwarding.
They're
Is
not.
anybody else experiencing that? It looks like I'm still on slide one.
I am too.
Yeah.
All I see is the first slide.
So no
Okay.
one's seeing my slides.
First
Okay.
slide only.
So you just need to
Okay.
forward it.
I
mean,
did.
no.
So I
just-
see.
Hmm.
So you still see just,
Yes. Oh,
oh
are you?
goodness. Yeah.
Wouldn't this, yeah, wouldn't you know?
Let me see. Okay. I'm not sure.
Do you have like a slideshow from the beginning or something?
Do you see that?
Reset?
No. Nope. The only way I could do, oh, so someone has, I'm sorry, someone has paused my sharing. I think that's on your end, Barbara. It says my screen sharing has been paused and I can't do it on my end.
Okay. Let me
All I
see.
can do is stop sharing.
So I'm gonna, I can
certainly stop and come back in.
yeah, I'll stop that for now and we'll see if we can get you back in. All right, can you all right, it says you're starting your screen sharing.
So now do you see the first slide?
Yep, now see if it'll forward.
And yes, so oops. Now do you see the second slide?
Yes, yes,
Oh,
okay.
okay. Yep. Oh,
We
my
should do
apologies.
business.
Oh my
No
gosh.
problem.
Do you mind if I start here?
Go right ahead.
Great. About half of the people, 54% living in New Hampshire, get their household drinking water from public water systems and are regulated under the state and federal Safe Drinking Water Acts. Sources for public water systems include lakes, rivers, and wells. The mission of the New Hampshire DES Drinking Water and Groundwater Bureau is to protect public health by ensuring safe and reliable drinking water through collaboration, education, assistance, and oversight. Through our grant program, assistance is provided to New Hampshire communities who need financial assistance to help achieve successful source water protection projects. Some of the reasons to apply for grant funding are to help plan and prepare for difficult circumstances with regards to drinking water sources, to help get your project rolling, to help mitigate impacts to source waters, and inevitably to help save money in the long term. All of these and more result in protecting our valuable drinking water sources. There are some new items in the application for this next round. And as I mentioned, the table of contents. So the table of contents, you can click on any section that you'd like, and it will take you directly to that section. Our other exciting new item is the increased funding. So we now have $25,000 for most grant projects and $30,000 for projects that address climate change challenges. New Hampshire DES is encouraging communities to be more involved with climate change initiatives by incorporating actions that will increase their resiliency against such events as flooding, erosion, sedimentation, and stresses to stormwater infrastructure. The data entry portion of the application has been made to be fillable. This allows the application to be more efficient with submitting online. In other words, you don't have to print it out, fill it out, scan it, and send it. Now you can just simply fill it in and send. The last new item is the attachment R, the climate change guidance. This is a guide to help you better understand what it is that New Hampshire DES and our programs are looking for with regards to implementation of climate change initiatives within a project. Just a few quick points about the Local Source Water Protection Grant Program. As previously mentioned, the funding has been increased this round. Many of the source water projects to date have been involving planning, implementation, public education, and outreach. There are also other types of projects, but these would likely be the ones that would be the focus for conservation commissions. The funding sources for this program come from the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund, whose goal it is to provide assistance to public water systems to finance all or part of the cost of drinking water related projects. So who can apply for these grants? Water suppliers, regional planning commissions, county conservation districts, watershed associations, municipalities, nonprofit organizations, state agencies, or educational institutions. Our most common applicants tend to be municipalities, regional planning commissions, and conservation groups and districts, with whom we hope to see more future involvement. Collaboration also occurs in some instances. We recently had a project in which North Conway Water Precinct oversaw a source water protection outreach project on behalf of the Saco Headwaters Alliance. A couple other examples are Granite State Rural Water Association, which is a nonprofit organization who worked with several partners in Maine and New Hampshire to host a full-scale emergency spill response exercise on the Salmon Falls River. The Lakes Region Planning Commission worked with municipalities as well, Ashland and Meredith, to identify and enact land use regulations and mapping updates to better protect local drinking water sources. There are 5 elements in which a potential grant project can be categorized. I'll speak briefly about each element to give you the general understanding of their intent or purpose. And towards the end of this presentation, Pierce will talk about some past project examples based on some of these elements. The first one is delineation. Delineation projects help define or refine source water protection areas using site-specific information. These projects can also involve delineation of more sensitive areas. Drinking water systems use information about the flow of underground water and surface to ground interactions to delineate or map groundwater source protection boundaries or a wellhead protection area. Delineations are often described as a buffer distance from a well or intake structure and are expressed in time of travel. For example, a 2-year time of travel refers to a distance from a well where it will take 2 years for water or contaminants to reach that well. Water systems may choose to divide these source water protection areas into relevant zones of concern. For surface water sources, water systems identify with the land area in the watershed upstream of an intake. In large watersheds, dividing these source water protection areas into segments or zones are helpful to identifying smaller, high priority sub-watersheds to create more focus. These may include areas closest to the intake where contamination sources are more likely to affect water quality. And finally, refining existing aquifer mapping. The second program element is assessment. An assessment project can entail inventory or evaluation or both. Inventory projects may involve improving upon existing inventories, such as inventory of land uses, the inventory of potential contamination sources, establishing water quality monitoring programs, or inventorying relevant local protection ordinances. Inventory projects are often part of a larger planning project. Evaluation projects may involve evaluating existing and potential threats to water quality or evaluating existing protection measures. Source water assessments are studies that generate reports or information about potential contamination sources and the potential impact by these sources on drinking water systems. Public water systems and source water protection partners can use the assessment data to develop an action plan and implement measures to protect and/or enhance the source water. These would be such things as public education, watershed conservation, the adoption of best management practices, or land use restrictions. These types of assessments can also guide water supply planning efforts and coordination of emergency responses. The third element is planning. Planning projects can use grant funding to identify appropriate protection measures that include such categories as educational programs, local land use regulations, land acquisition planning, source water protection planning, and watershed management planning. With the new focus on climate change initiatives, we are now asking for protection and management plans to incorporate actions that increase resiliency against challenges resulting from climate change induced events. Those are what I mentioned before, such as the flooding, erosion, stresses to stormwater infrastructures. A good planning project application will explain how the project will support implementation of source water protection measures and demonstrates a high likelihood of being achieved. Our fourth program element is implementation. Implementation projects are exactly that. They implement or carry out protection and security measures in source water protection areas. These types of projects can include, but are not exhaustive to, land transaction costs that are associated with permanent protection of source water protection lands, source sustainability, such as preserving groundwater recharge and water conservation, education and outreach, MS4 required permit activities, and stormwater best management practices, as well as those that I previously mentioned under the planning element. The final fifth element is security. Security projects are fairly straightforward. They generally involve the installation of security equipment or material to further enhance or upgrade security measures around the drinking water source directly. This includes such items as fencing, access gates, security systems, signs, cameras, locks, and lights. A successful project has a clear, defined purpose. What is your goal? How will it result for improved source water protection? Identifying and involving local stakeholders to support your project is very important. This is carried out through letters of support. The more support you have, the better scoring of your application. Details, timelines, who, what, when, and where, site plans, any additional information to better understand who's involved and the reason for the project. Your project should lead to implementation, carrying out the protection measures. And then once a project is completed, there are tangible deliverables submitted to DES for review and approval. Some main important components to the program's eligibility are: you can't exceed the $25,000 for most projects or the $30,000 for the climate change initiative projects. The project must address an active or planned source and must address some component of the source water protection program. So one or more of the 5 elements that I just spoke about. The funds, once you're approved, can only be awarded for work done after final GNC approval. So even though you might have the team all ready to start the project, it can't begin until it has been signed off by the governor and council. Any work done prior to this will be not eligible or billable for grant funding. An additional note that I'd like to make is the same applicant can apply for 2 distinct projects in 1 year. in both our last round and current round of grants, each had one grantee that had two projects approved. This is not uncommon. Scoring. The scoring of the application happens by review team evaluation, followed by a ranking process. This occurs mid-November to early December. The scoring sheets added at the end of the application are utilized during this review process. There are two, and those are specific to each security and source protection projects. Higher resulting points will produce a higher ranking application. So by utilizing these scoring sheets when filling out the application can help you guide your application for better scoring in the end. So also take note of the criteria at the bottom of the score sheets that subtract points. You definitely don't want to subtract anything. And as previously mentioned, details. The more that is known and understood about the proposed project, the better. Now some important dates. Funding for grants occurs every year. Submittal deadline for this round is November 1st, 2021. The selected applicants will be notified sometime in January of 2022. Grant agreements are typically approved by Governor and Council during the months of April or May of 2022. And once they are approved, then the project can start. You can find and download all the applications available online at the DES website provided. And I just want to make note too that the ending date for each project is all the same. The deadline would be May 31st, it would be of 2023 for this round. So now I'd like to turn it over to Pierce, who's going to give you some examples of some successful past projects that we've had in the past.
Great. Great, thanks, Bess, for the beginning of this presentation. It's very good. So I'm going to talk briefly about some past projects that DES has funded through this grant program. Next slide, please. So we have worked with a number of outside organizations, although a lot of water systems look to this particular fund or this grant program for funding to protect their sources of drinking water. A variety of organizations such as nonprofits, conservation commissions, universities have applied to the Source Water Protection Program to learn or to work to implement programs and actions to protect drinking water resources in New Hampshire. In the example in one example, Granite State Rural Water Association provided assistance essentially to develop a watershed plan for the Whitewater watershed, which is is actually in 3 communities, as you can see on the map: Claremont, Cornish, and Croydon. And that watershed, along with 2 other watersheds and the Sugar River, provide Claremont the majority, its primary source of drinking water. So the idea in this plan, part of this work involved looking at the current land use trends, the zoning protections, and related regulatory protections, as well as land conservation that is in place throughout the defined watershed that drains to the reservoirs, and come up with a series of actions that currently is being implemented. And these include educational actions, as well as looking at additional monitoring of water quality to identify sources of bacteria and other contaminants that are affecting water quality in the source water. And so the city of Claremont currently has an action plan that's being implemented at the local level, and we continue to support the implementation of that watershed plan through our grant program. So once a plan is written, such as a watershed plan that's defined and protecting a source of drinking water, that plan implementation of the plan can be funded through the Source Water Protection Grant Program. Next slide, please. Oh, there we go. We work with regional planning commissions, and so regional planning commissions are often focused on plans and regulatory updates at the local level, including implementing model protections for groundwater, for instance. In this example, Stratford Regional Planning Commission worked with the city of Rochester and Dover to update their water conservation regulations. So those regulations tend to limit water use or the design of a particular development, commercial development, and for example, to minimize the type of landscaping to minimize the amount of water use, and also to include stormwater management provisions to minimize the impacts of stormwater. So regulations that are currently that have been updated in these communities. I think we have an example in the next slide, but basically these tend to restrict water use, which is allowable under state statute. They also control the landscaping choices and designs that are being implemented at the local level to, again, minimize the amount of water used for supporting, higher use or higher amounts of water use for vegetation. Next slide. Thank you. Green Mountain Conservation Group in 2016, and actually in a number of other years, has put together both an education outreach series of materials that they've worked with their communities in the Conway area, up in Effingham and Freedom, and a variety of other communities in that Ossipee area, to distribute education to the public or to targeted audiences to protect groundwater, and have also worked as a organization to support the passage of local groundwater zoning, which in a number of the communities in that area has passed to apply additional protections through zoning ordinances. Their educational materials have ranged from things like what's called Snow Pro and Get Wet brochures and things that help to limit the amount of salt that's applied by municipal and private contractors. Get Wet is an educational program for young kids to learn about their water supply, and those have been implemented in some of the schools, as well as business brochures, which tend to focus on what businesses can do to minimize the release of substances that could affect groundwater quality. They've also helped towns to implement what are called BMP surveys, which are on-site inspections, essentially, of facilities that use larger quantities of what are called regulated substances. And those BMP inspections the purpose of those are to ensure that measures are in place that would limit the release of a substance that would potentially contaminate groundwater. And those surveys are done on a regular basis, or inspections are done on a regular basis, along with the distribution of educational materials and reminders to businesses that they need to be careful because they may be contaminating groundwater that is used by a public water system or in the community generally. Next slide, please. Along similar lines, the other area that communities and conservation commissions may be interested in is accessing the source water protection grant funds to pay for what are transactional costs that are related to conservation easements for lands that are in source water protection areas, such as a wellhead protection area or within a hydrologic area of concern, which is essentially a small watershed that drains to a surface water intake. So if you're in those areas, those lands that are being conserved require attorney's fees, require baseline surveys and other information that other information as part of the transaction that takes place. And so in order to pay for that, the Source Water Protection Grant Program can use, an application can come to us and can fund those fees or those expenses that are related to land acquisition for protecting land within a source protection area. And if you need maps or information for your community about knowing where those areas are, DES has that information either available through our viewer, but it does require registration. So you have to register to view this information because it's security sensitive. Or we can send you a map for municipal use that shows in your community where source protection areas are, along with existing, for instance, existing conservation lands. I think that might be the last one, or there might be one more. Yes, that's it. Thanks.
Well, thanks, Pierce. I do have a couple questions in the chat, but I think people can also unmute themselves if they feel like they want to ask a question directly. I think we have just the right amount of people that wouldn't get too confusing. So the question that I have is from Jay. It says, what does it mean by support water supplier? And I believe this was earlier in the program. Our town is supplied by private wells. Does this mean we are not eligible for a grant?
I think Bess can probably answer that one.
Yep. So our program is, we have source water protection areas. We have public water system areas that we're focused on for this grant program. So private well owners themselves typically don't apply for these types of grants. If there's something happening within the area, though, that's within the source water protection area for a particular public water system, then they can apply, you know, as an entity outside of, you know, being an individual person. I think I'm not sure if I'm answering that quite directly, but.
So if a town water supply, you know, it sounds like it's not an individual well, it's a town water supply, but it's
But it's not
private.
also, yeah, so it can also involve not only the town supply itself, but there's like public water systems, say a cooperative organization has their own public water system.
Okay.
So, you know, homeowners associations, just different entities like that also have their own public water system. So it's not just municipality.
Okay, so if your municipality has a well, that would be eligible, but if it's a privately owned well, it's not going to be eligible.
Not necessarily, no.
Not unless it's with
Right.
a bigger organization. Okay.
Correct.
And that might be something, this might be a good, you know, question to contact you directly so that you can get more details on this specific case.
Sure, absolutely, yep.
So, and the same person asked, oh, let's see. Just that they would be applying as the Conservation Commission, but I think that would still, the answer would still be the same, even if you're applying as the Conservation Commission. If those wells are private, it has to be a water system in some manner, right, to be eligible.
Yeah, I think I'd like to kind of understand what the whole idea is, you know, where this actually is located, to see if there's any other source water protection areas.
Gotcha.
Close by, you know, that sort of thing.
Sure. Well, that leads into this next question. Could Pierce repeat the information on the maps that are available? Could you explain that again, Pierce, how people can get to the maps?
Yeah, I did put it in the chat. I didn't I don't want to play around on my computer too much because I
Right.
might lose you. But if you go to des.nh.gov, there's a one-stop GIS mapper tool, and if you get registered with DES, it will add essentially the water supply source protection areas and the wells for public water systems, and you can see where all of those are, which essentially will produce a map that you could use for your application or for just your general knowledge of where drinking water resources are in your community. And that would include public water supplies. We also have some private wells that have been submitted to us through well drillers, or we can just produce a map for you. So if you contact Bess or I, we can have our GIS group produce a map that shows all of those areas for your community, and that again would be useful for discussion at the local level and for developing an application in an area that would be eligible.
Great. Yeah, those maps are very handy. So once you kind of get used to using the program, you can really gather a lot of information. So I do recommend checking that out. And again, you just have to register, but once you're in, you can access the information. And so Warner has a significant aquifer downstream from its source water area. Does that mean we are not eligible for aquifer protection work?
No, it doesn't mean that you're not eligible. So as long as you're in an area that is a source, is a significant resource for the community that supports a public water system, or that would be an eligible project. So eligibility, just as Beth said, means it's supporting or protecting an active or planned source of drinking water. And that typically means a well, because we have almost 3,000 wells in New Hampshire, public water system wells, or intakes that are surface water that are providing, a lake or a reservoir. And so the delineation of those contributing areas is the area typically we look at for eligibility for a project.
Okay, so aquifer, even though it's not necessarily, upstream from your supply, would be a contributing area. And again, a lot of these, I think it might be a good opportunity to check in directly with Bess and Pierce, just to make sure you're all talking about the same project here. So one more question, let's see. Is a protection plan required, or could a grant be just to jump into protecting a water source with an easement? So do you have to have that plan ahead of, established, or would an easement that, especially if you have the documentation that it clearly protected a source of drinking water, would that be a standalone project?
Yeah, right. So I did see that. I did reply in the chat,
Sure.
and no, a plan isn't required. I mean, it's a good idea to have plans because it kind of sets a roadmap for the future, but no, if you have, you want to do an educational program in your community, you want to work with the schools, you want to work with your regional planning commission to put an ordinance together, or something that's an eligible activity, and we would support that. And as I mentioned earlier, the last round, I think in part due to COVID, we left money on the table, so conservation commissions can come to us in advance, and we will meet with you individually, and we can talk about your ideas and help you determine what would score well and what would be a good project in your community, or with you in your community. We defer to people's understanding of their own communities and their needs, but we certainly can help you with guiding you to put together a good application.
That's excellent. Great. So are there any other questions? Again, you're welcome to unmute and go ahead and speak directly to Pierce or Bess if you have a question that you want to ask today.
Hello?
Yes, John, go ahead. Ask your question.
Okay. If one's looking to do an easement that's on to protect the source of water, source. Do you guys have specific language or that you would want in an easement, or some guidelines that would be available? And also, are there limitations on who can own the easement? Our Conservation Commission often has a third party hold, like Five Rivers or Society for the Protection, holding the easement, although we provide sometimes money to get them in to happen.
Sure, that is a good question.
So yes, that's a very good question. Each of the funding sources that you, John, or others might be looking at, including LCHIP or other funds like the Drinking Water and Groundwater Trust Fund, will have some conditions associated with the funding. For instance, some limit ATV use, and I think that's true for the trust fund. Others have other limitations that go with the funding source. In the case of what we would require, I think what we would be looking for if someone was looking to come in and say, well, we'd like some money to develop the easement and pay for some of the other transactional costs, is an idea of where the eventual funding sources would be coming from, so that we would have a better understanding of, for instance, in your example of an easement, how that easement would have to be crafted. And we would probably be looking for more information around what kind of attorney or organization that you'd be working with to develop the easement language, so that we would have a process where we would probably review the language and ensure that it was ready to move forward to the organ with consistent with what the funding organizations would want to see in those easement documents. And so that we currently have $2 million that's available through the trust fund, or that has been available. With the round is just closed for eligibility applications, but there's likely to be money every year for protecting water supplies and in-source water protection areas through the Drinking Water and Groundwater Trust Fund. So this program, just making it simple, in order to get ready to do that, the Source Water Protection Grant Program can receive applications to help you craft an easement and pay for attorney's fees to do that, do baseline surveys to get a better sense of where the property bounds are and things like that. So it's really prepping these projects for the next step, which is to go to the funding organizations with applications saying we've done our homework, we have our things in order.
Thank you.
Thanks, Pierce. I also have a question. How often is this funding kind of paired up with other, whether it be like the ARM fund or other state funds that might either, be used for matching funds, or, if you're working
that's a
on
good
an
question.
easement, it could, potentially be,
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, typically there's a 50 for the trust fund, there's a 50% match, which means only 50% of the project cost is going to come from the Drinking Water and Groundwater Trust Fund. So that other 50, and that can be quite significant for large conservation projects. So the other programs such as LCHIP, for instance, or the ARM fund are often paired with the trust fund to try to find that other 50% match. And I didn't really come prepared to talk a lot about today about there's a Merrimack River watershed project that's about to be launched through the Merrimack River Watershed Council. That's going to include $6.9 million for land conservation in source water protection areas. And so I expect that those funds are going to start seeing their place in New Hampshire, and many of them might be are going to be in source water protection areas. The way the application for the Merrimack River Watershed Council, the way they crafted this project, it's coming from federal dollars from the USDA, from the Natural Resources Conservation, is that this is a statewide initiative. So these funds will be able to be used anywhere in New Hampshire, but the intent is to protect drinking water resources and in source water protection areas. Probably more information than you wanted, but just to let you know, the upcoming year is going to be a big year for land conservation and funding in New Hampshire. So it'd be great to have conservation commissions that are interested play a role in helping to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really exciting project. And we are going to have Don Kierstard, I think it is, from NRCS speak about that watershed project at the NHACC conference, November 6th. So I think that's a great, I mean, it's a great amount of money. So it's wonderful to see that coming to New Hampshire and being able to match it with other state and local funds. I think it's going to have some significant impacts on protecting drinking water here. So any other questions? I don't see any more in the chat box. But again, you're welcome to unmute and ask directly.
I just have a quick question, Barb. Will this presentation be posted within the next few weeks to your site?
Yes. So
Okay.
we're working on the lineup right now for the NHACC conference, and we are planning to have most of those. We'll have the workshop list up on our website probably in the next week or two.
Great.
And yeah, so we're going to be doing online again this fall. It was just a tricky time to try to figure out what to do again. So we did end up going on Zoom, and so it'll be just a morning program. But that's why we're also doing the lunch and learn, so that we can supplement that half day with more of these overview programs throughout the fall.
Great. So, and I'll just note that, our program does a lot of work with municipalities and boards. So if any of the commissions, if there's an interest in having us speak or be involved in a discussion involving drinking water, we're happy to, and protecting those resources, we're happy to meet remotely or, discuss this further at another time. And thanks again, Barbara, for including us in your lunch and learn. It's great.
Yes, of
Thank
course. No, thank you for getting us off to a good start. And again, just so everybody knows, I will be sending out a link to the recording, as well as some information on the DES website and the drinking water, source water protection website, and some information, contact information as well, because it sounds like some of the questions you have are very specific to your community. So that might be better to contact Bess and Pierce directly to talk about those potential projects. So again, thank you all for tuning in today. I appreciate all that you do and all the work that conservation commissions do throughout New Hampshire. And I think it's really exciting if we can fund some of these projects and work with DES to protect our drinking water. And thank you to Bess and to Pierce for coming today to give us some more information about this opportunity. And again, for working with commissions who are working on these projects and getting us through the application process. I really appreciate that assistance. So everybody have a great afternoon. And again, you're welcome to follow up with me as well if you have any additional questions. So take care, have a good afternoon. And next week's program is on trails and e-bikes. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks, Beth.
Thank you.
Thank you.